Hello, I'm Maggie Dent. I'm a parenting author and educator and podcaster from Australia, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be a part of this wonderful event. And thank you, Michael and team, for inviting me. I just want to start at the beginning of this to say that there has been a fabulous revolution in Australia around fathering, and we have our dads turning up not only to my seminars but to like Saturdays, there's hardly any mums anymore in our playgrounds, they're dads. So I just want to acknowledge, because I'm focusing on mums today, but I just want to celebrate that we know that our dads are turning up with bigger hearts in bigger numbers. So it's not that I'm excluding them in any way. I want to show you this picture because even though I'm now 70, this is a moment of my oldest son's first day at school. And what is really interesting is that when that little one in the pusher first arrived, I had people coming up to me in despair that the poor me has had another boy. No, seriously, I bet you wanted a girl. I'm so sorry, Maggie, so sorry. And then when I had my fourth son, it was even worse. And one lady even went and lit candles in a Catholic church for me because she felt so sorry for me. And that oldest boy behind me was 8 at the time, and he said, "Mummy, why do people say that about us boys?" And that's when I realised, how come we've got this narrative that sometimes turns up? And that's, I think, where the passion in me became for turning into being a champion for our boys. Now, these are my boys all growing up, and I know they look wonderful, but I haven't been a perfect mother, and I just need to acknowledge that before I go any further. The two on the left side of the screen are my rooster boys, and the two on the other side are my lambs. And temperament has a lot to do with how they turn up in the world. So just wanted to acknowledge that there's no perfect in my journey, and that what I'm going to share with you today is how do we build a better understanding of our boys if we are female. So how did I get this passion? Well, I was lucky and unlucky in a way. My mum wasn't my warm attachment person when I was a little girl. It was my dad. So if I wet the bed or I had a nightmare, it was always my dad. So I guess I learnt in the 50s that dads can be the secure attachment person, and maybe that was tucked away in my mind. And then not only that, my youngest brother, I'm in a family of 6, was a gentle boy. And so I guess I was marinated in a very different narrative to what the traditional world was putting out there, that boys are always strong and rowdy and noisy. And so I think those things helped me before I became a high school teacher of co-ed, where I taught boys and girls equally. And then in my counselling, it was the boys who came to me because they didn't have anyone else who felt safe enough to talk to. So I just knew the disclaimer at the beginning that, of course, there's not an all-girl box and an all-boy box, that we absolutely recognise that, gender is also fluid. But what the stats show is around 70% of our girls and our boys are fairly what we call atypical. Now, in the boys' atypical ones, again, we've got roosters and lambs. We've got the vibrant, out there alpha boys, and we've got the gentle ones. So when I'm referring to boys here, it's a statistically significant number. However, let us keep in mind this is not about what are we doing to get in front of girls, to catch up with girls. We want whatever we do to help all of our kids thrive, and it's not a competition. So this is a man box version, and I know it's probably something that's come up already in the summit, and that is that the traditional patriarchy view is embedded deeply in our Western cultures and possibly other cultures I'm not familiar with. And that is that message again that men are supposed to be these incredible strong things who are always stoic, who never need help, who never show their vulnerabilities. And that message is still sadly flowing through, and it's conditioning that happens from the time we're little. So I'm going to challenge some of that today, because we now know that those sensitive boys of ours can be incredibly fearless and brave as well, and that we have to do something to improve the mental health of our boys. So this particular list of things came when I had 4 little boys on the planet. Professor Richard Fletcher in Australia is a professor who studies gender studies. And he came to do a seminar, and he put these up and said the chances of these happening if you're a boy or a man are around 70 to 75%. Now, when I look at the statistics in America, these figures are even higher. Obviously, we don't have in Australia the shooting statistics and the violence that you have around that sort of stuff. So essentially, when I looked at those statistics from the latest of your best researchers around boys, I was really disturbed that there's so much more happening in this space that we would love to wind back so we can all raise our boys to grow up to be good humans at the end of the day. So in Australia, once again, our system is fairly similar in many ways to the US system, where we shifted several years ago from having, a fairly play-based, slow entry into formalised learning to pushing it down and testing the heck out of our kids. So we have in Australia more 4 to 6 year olds being suspended or expelled, more diagnosis for ADHD, often boys because they can't sit still, more boys in years 3 to 5. If they do transition quite well, they're disengaging because they much prefer to be on their iPads and tablets playing Minecraft and everything else. So technically a rough figure is that 80% of our discipline problems are boys, 70% diagnosed learning problems, and I know the statistics are equally as disturbing. So the OECD said a number of years ago we've got a crisis, and I feel we've done very little about it, so I'm a part of fixing that. All right, so the next thing that we do know, because of that man box influence, there is still a perception or maybe a belief that we can speak more harshly to boys because they can handle it, and that girls we need to be particularly sensitive to. So imagine a little girl falls over, we often swoop down with them with a really soft voice and, oh my gosh, let me help you get up. If a boy falls over, it's still that perception, come on mate, up you get. Now my challenge is that either of those aren't helpful, that if a child falls over, we go, oh my gosh, are you okay? Do you need a grown-up's help? Without either sending a message, you're too weak or you're too strong. So my first challenge that we have to do is this, the myth that boys are tough. So I'm going to deplug it from as early as possible so that we can understand why our boys need more tenderness, need more love, need more, basically that emotional and tender support that often is hard to give them because they can be really energetic, can't they? Okay, so this is the fragility factor. In the stats that I've read, baby boys die pre-birth, at birth, in the first 12 months of life, higher numbers than girls. We now know from neuroscience that in the first 12 weeks of gestation, which is when the brain is formed, that the flooding of testosterone actually slows down the brain development in utero. And so that means that when little girls are born, their brain is more developed than boys. And that flows through, and it's one of the most important things we have to hold in our minds as we transition our boys to school, because they are technically behind our girls academically or cognitively. There's some research showing, and this comes from a study from the Kids Institute in Western Australia, where a professor studied the level of testosterone in cord blood and then tested across a number of parameters, and he discovered that the higher levels of testosterone often correlated to more difficulty learning to read. So once again, not a causation, just a correlation. And then the next one is that because that means that when they arrive, they're less brave, less aware, they're more likely to experience what we call attachment trauma. They're less likely to attach. One of the studies I've seen shows that if you pick a baby girl up out of a cot between 3 months and 6 months, she will lock onto a face. Whereas you pick a little baby boy up, they're more likely to look at the light or the mobile or the window. So those sorts of things means attachment can be more difficult, and that is the key for us raising healthier boys. Then all of that, there's all these other things that are more likely to impact boys than girls, and some of those are the endocrine disruptors and toxins that are in our environment. Our boys are way more sensitive to those things than our girls. So I think we need to almost relabel it that girls are really tough in certain ways and boys are tough physically, but we have to remove it completely because not all kids are. So that means that they're more likely to struggle with stress, and there's a lot of other things on top of that. So one of the things we know, this comes from Steve Biddulph, who's written, his books have sold millions around the world. He made this statement many years ago, one of the only books I ever read, it is actually more likely for boys to display these things, separation, distress, anxiety, but it doesn't come out often as vulnerability. It often comes out in externalized behavior. We now know that this link in male violence is linked to this neglect in childhood, a lack of physical and emotional nurturing, so they need just as much as our little girls get. And I have to acknowledge too that this under-nurturance in this developmental window, which was mentioned in Sean Coleman and Michael Gurian's great book, is that this is a key window that can reduce the violence later in life, that can reduce the chances of ending up with any sorts of challenges. We know secure attachment impacts all levels of development, and I believe if we can really address that, especially with mothering, we can make a significant difference in their lives. So what we know, if we look back traditionally into the traditional cultures, little girls and little boys were just marinated by a whole lot of women until around 8 or 9. So all of them got the same sort of tender mothering stuff. So once that was all there, then later they navigated towards the men on the journey to manhood. And in many ways, this key window is why the more we understand boys, the more we're going to be able to meet those nutritional needs. And I have to put this slide up again, this sense of so often previous generations and in my counselling and my work with dads, many of them were harshly beaten as little boys. So those traumas are stored really deeply in our little boys. So whatever it is, we've got to stop hurting little boys in the hope that that makes them be better boys, because it does the exact opposite. But that what we want to do is develop the emotional coaching, and we need to have the tenderness around when they muck up so that they can gradually learn how to make better choices. They are not innately bad. So thank you again for the way that these fragilities start early, and I want them to be sound and full of lots of love. So obviously other differences we just know that the threat center in the brain is bigger in boys because, back in that traditional community, what's the main job for men was to go and kill mammoths or, saber-toothed tigers or kill the deer for dinner, and then they practiced killing because that was really big. So they had to be really aware of threat because it kept us all alive. And the second one underneath that is testosterone. It is so much more, vulnerable in terms of the energy it gives into bodies than estrogen, which is it's a more bonding and connection hormone. So movement matters enormously in this way, because when our little boys are flooded with too much stress, movement helps to move it. So that's what happens in some of our school environments. And their dopamine, which is the feel-good, neurochemical in the brain, it depletes much more quickly than girls. And it often looks like disruptive behaviour, sitting on a mat on the floor. But sometimes a boy may squirm and wiggle around because he's trying to make more dopamine, because he wants to hear the end of the story that his educator is reading to him, but he may be punished because he couldn't sit still. Not good. So a couple of other things that are, I love this. Neil Farmer's been a leading light, in early childhood educator. So there's this whole notion of touching things, and often they don't contemplate the consequences of a choice, which is much more likely for girls. They often think things through. And as I now have granddaughters, I've learned they're much more capable of that. So these are things that are considered quite normal. They're not deliberately boys doing things to annoy us. Remember, we're a female with that wonderful logic. Why on earth did they do that? I'm going to help you with that. So that's an example. Just wanted to see if you can pull all those things up, what's underneath it. And here, that boy is that really where the goat does a poo? They just want to check things out. And sometimes we take them to the wrong places where they pick things up that can break. Okay, and I love this from Michael Gurian's work way, way back. I'd already worked it out, but I needed somebody who had more experience around the science. And that our boys give themselves self-worth when they feel they've done good. And sometimes that drives their competitive nature. I want to win. I want to hit that target. I'm the loudest. I'm the best. Remember, that's still partly conditioned and partly part of biology. But what we actually know is that sometimes a boy, especially little boys, I'm aiming this towards them at the moment, will set them up a challenge that they'd like to do. And it might be building a Lego or a Duplo tower okay? And they've already got it in their mind how big they want it to be. And it might be just before bed, or it might be just before they leave for school. And then mum, because lots of mums today are wired to have, if your house isn't tidy, you're not a good enough mum. So they come in and say, right, bedtime, pack it all away, pack it all away. So that little boy didn't get to finish it. And so in a way, he's not going to feel as good about himself as he could have. So my tip to all mums is just before you do that, pause and say, if you haven't finished building it, you can do it in the morning or you can do it after school. And a mum actually contacted me with the impact on her son. She had 2 sons, 6 and 4. She did that every morning, packed it all away. She said that to her son, and on the way to school, he said, Mummy, today might be the best day of my life. I'm going to be able to finish building what I started in the morning. So always keep that in mind, that they are going to give themselves self-worth. We cannot give it to them. And it's a really important thing to keep in mind. So every now and then, our boys are focused on doing things that matter to them, or things that what's in it for me. And they can do weird things. Look at this one. They're always testing themselves. One mum reached out and said to me, her son came in and said, I'm going to dig to China. And she was so sweet. She'd come to my seminar and she said, oh, let me know how it goes. Whereas in her head, as a mum, you want to tell them, stop, it's a stupid idea. You're never going to be able to dig to China. Don't waste it. Right? If we hold that in and let him go on that adventure until he works it out, that is so much more powerful. And apparently the boy came in after a week with many blisters and said, can't dig to China. And this is the same thing. What on earth is he doing upside down? Probably because his dopamine level is flooded while you waited for coffee. So he just flipped upside down. This is another really important, it's one of my favourite quotes out of the Mothering Our Boys book. What our boys need is enough parental guidance to keep them alive versus enough freedom to allow them to seize authentic moments of joy and delight that makes them glad to be alive. So there's this adventure part in them. Remember that it's not just the amygdala, it's the fact that they're looking for things that I can do that make me feel good. Like, can I test myself? So we have here's my story from my own farm. I grew up on a wheat and sheep farm in Western Australia. It was freezing in winter, mind you, not as cold as parts of the US get to in Canada. -5 it was, and this stream in the middle of the paddock, my boys were 6 and 4, and they said, we want to jump in. And of course, I remember my mum brain going, don't be ridiculous, you'll just get sick, and I haven't got enough. And I went, oh my goodness, stop. They want to be brave. And I used to do that as a little girl. So I stepped back. Don't ask me why they need to take their clothes off, but they took their clothes off as well. And they jumped in, and I thought they'll only do it once. But no, they got back out, looked at each other, said, let's go again. And then by the third time, let's go again. Like, no joke, they were so blue, and possibly all those little parts of their external genitalia had disappeared inside their body. And then I suddenly realized that was one of those moments that had picked their self-worth up because they had been brave, because that archetype is important. So every now and then, no matter what the mum's brain says, so my tip is always have spare towels and spare clothes in the back of your car, just in case there's a puddle. Now, our boys can feel like school is a war zone. You know, not only the need to be compliant, to remember things, and I'm going to explain to you why they can forget things shortly. Sometimes they're punished because they're not able to colour in within the lines. Maybe they weren't able to stand in line really still, because a lot of boys need more movement to help navigate their emotional and their stress levels. Sometimes they can get hungry, and I'm going to say hangry is a real thing. When a boy, and often a lot of men, when they get hungry, it seems to be a real alarm thing. The amygdala goes, oh my gosh. So if they're already hangry in a class, there's no way they're going to be able to concentrate, and they can often externalize that behavior. Sometimes we often say to little boys, use your words. They often haven't got words in those early years. So please, that's something I really want early childhood educators to be really mindful of. And the next one is around poo. And I know this is kind of probably really a bit weird out there, but what I identified with my own sons, and then I've worked with lots of educators, is that the whole notion of being able to open their bowels is a lot more stressful things than it is for little girls. And many out there will know the last part of toilet training and potty training that happens is usually boys, and it's usually around this. There's a sensitivity to body movements. They have it's a really complex area, but I just want to say they need to be in an environment that's really calm. And so school's not really calm. So quite often they will bring that home. So if you have a boy you've just picked up who may be hangry, who's also got a poo that's due, you could also have like a really crabby boy in the car. Next thing, once again, they're quite often picking other people's stuff up and getting into trouble. Remembering all the rules. I mean, they really want to remember all the rules, but sometimes they forget. And then sometimes there's a moment we know, and this is a really important thing to keep in mind. Steve Benoff has talked a lot about little girls are born with fine motor control and boys have core strength. And gradually over the first 8 years of life, girls develop core strength and the boys develop fine motor skill. So what can happen in that? He cannot print in the small lines. He cannot colour within the lines. And so often a task he gets asked to do, he just cannot do it. So we've really got to keep that in mind. The other thing is really important is our little boys are very sensitive around attachment, which I've already explained to you. We have to help them become securely attached to a teacher. And if he thinks the teacher doesn't like him, it's going to be really hard. We know this is a sensitivity, and that if they don't feel safe with the teacher, the environment might be safe, then there's a chance that he's going to be perceived and his self-worth will be low and his behaviour will be coming from a space of stress. So I did a big survey about dads. I wanted to know how that relationship is. And essentially, a lot of our dads are basically really happy and generally get on well. But the ones that didn't, I wanted to know what had happened, because none of us wants to create a mother wound. So I love this again, Michael's quote. So those unresolved issues with your mother can play out for the rest of your life, not just with your intimate partner if you're heterosexual, but for females you work with. So we need to make sure we're not scarring our boys. And what are the ways that we can understand what that is? So this is a very simplistic version of it. So once again, my mum was cold and distant. What's the difference? So we don't want that. We know that, obviously. What's smother mother? That's not endlessly kissing the heck out of your son. It's when you invade their boundaries a lot and maybe are forever all over them constantly, so they don't have a sense of who they are. It's called enmeshed relationships. So what they need is someone who's warm, fair, firm, and fun. So a bit of that blend. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. They do need boundaries, but they don't need to be punished with the boundaries. They need to be coached along, and we need to lighten up if we've got boys, because laughter helps them release stress. So my big tips for you, the 6 key areas. So that I've already mentioned the lack of emotional nurturing, but if we're shaming, criticizing, ridiculing, rejecting, which was really common in earlier parenting, then that's going to scar them very deeply about their sense of self. When we see boys' behaviour as bad, naughty, stupid and inevitable, that is not helpful. So if a little boy does something spontaneously, when we don't punish him in that moment, but we've got to coach him why that's not okay so that he can make a better choice next time. Having unrealistic expectations of how they see the world, and I'm going to give you some tips in a moment. Believing that they're innately tougher than our girls, I've already sorted that, and then resisting the need for them to individuate and become a separate grown up. Because as mothers, we just want to be able to give them everything they need to get through life, but sometimes we have to actually let them step away from us. It's the biggest breakup on earth, and that of course really applies in the adolescent journey. So one of the things I found from not only my counselling and my teaching, but from the survey, is that many men struggle to feel the love that their mum had for them. And why is that? Because in those early years particularly, you know, they'll jump on a sibling from a top bunk without thinking about it. They'll draw on walls. You know, they will do all these things spontaneously that you'll be going, no, stop it. Don't do that. I told you not to do that. So all they hear is that. Well, how do you feel loved if all you're getting is that? So my number one tip is how does he know I love him, even though I am constantly every now and then needing to offer corrections because he's doing crazy things. So one of the things you can do is you can say that your heart and his heart is like a cup, and that we put love into it. And you might ask him, so how much love do you feel? from mummy at the moment. So if you've had those tender moments, he's obviously got that. But if you've also been at him too much and yelling at him and shaming him, and I've got some words coming up that will help you with that, then he's not going to have the love cup very full of that. And I remember one little boy saying, yeah, no, there's some love in there, mummy, but there's a lot of poo. So start off with this. Always keep a term of endearment for your boys of all ages, even when they've grown up to be an adult. It's really important. Next one, every now and then, remember when they come home from school, please don't interrogate them. They often can't remember a thing, and the fact they can't remember it because they're just coming from the war zone means they've let you down, and they know they've let you down, so they feel bad. So just say, hey, I missed you, right? And if you can, shove some food in their mouth, just in case. And know that all that stuff that's coming out is like coming from a war zone, and they've come into the safest space with you. Sometimes that's a meltdown, but it's not necessarily they had a bad day. It just means that they're finally safe enough to let that out because they haven't let it out at school. I'm huge on bedtime rituals, especially for our boys, because they're quite pragmatic and good about numbers. So if you want to improve your relationship with your son under 8, start a bedtime ritual on the nights that you're calm and you can do it. And the first thing you say is I love you more than every star in the night sky. I love you more than every grain of sand on every beach in the whole wide world. And I love you more than all the hairs on all the bears. Because that's a huge number. And your boys will come down with different versions of that, and it becomes a personalised bedtime ritual that both co-parents can use, grandparents can use. And seriously, the more deeply embedded that is, the more secure they feel, the better their adolescence is going to be as well. Remember, secure attachment is the grounding that every little boy needs. So lots of safe moments, safe touches. Please make sure you've got photos on your phone of him. Make sure we put photos around your house of him with his siblings or his friends or you, because he needs to see images that remind him he is loved and connected, even if he's mucking up. Once again, body connections. Our boys often want to touch us or high-five us. All of those things are really, really important. And create mum dates. I love one-on-one time for both parents. Mum dates is where you go and you do something he loves. Not to ask questions, not to interrogate, just simply one-on-one time. So you can find that particular thing on my website. Now, this other journey is we often think boys are only shaped by men, but as a former teacher, I can tell you now, boys are watching women too, at who do I want to be and what thing. And it took me years to realise when I was stopped by former students years later. Often they were boys who I thought I'd missed, who I hadn't connected as deeply with. And they would say to me, you said this once in a classroom and I've taken that on board and I want to say thanks for that. Or you showed me what kindness is. So they're watching all women, not just you as their mother. They're watching their teachers, they're watching their aunts, they're watching their grandmothers. So keep that in mind. This is how lovely our boys can be. I had lots of these messages in the book from mums. Yeah, they're fighting to get their own bed. And then next thing you know, they're sleeping in one of their beds together because there is this connection. They're yearning for the same connection all of us do. All right, so there's a few differences on how our boys and men tend to see the world, and this is why when we understand it better, we are able to see it through a different lens. The first one is often anything they want to do, a project to build something, they often want to do it without looking at the instructions because it's like a test. Yeah, so keep that in mind. We can get, oh no, you've got to follow all the instructions. Allow them to go, and then maybe you'll help them later with the instructions. The second one is our boys are much more wired for single focus than they are for multiple focus. And an example of this is your son might be just a metre or so away from you, and you've called out to him and said, David, it's time for dinner, go wash your hands. So he hasn't moved. He's playing with some Lego. So you call it a little bit louder and then you start saying, oh, he's doing that deliberately. He's deliberately ignoring me. He hasn't actually heard you. And so if you suddenly yell at him to make him do what you want, he suddenly goes, why my mum suddenly yelling at me? So go over, connect, ruffle his hair so he sees you, and then you can ask him. So connect before you direct. Single focus is a huge thing in both our interactions. And at different times, that single focus is why so often, and you might send them into their room to get their shoes and they don't come back. On the way in, they saw a truck on the floor, so they ended up playing with that. Can you see? And we can get so frustrated. I want you to now understand single focus. So how do you counteract that getting ready in the mornings? You have a basket or a box with everything they need to get dressed in the morning in the one box. And as they gradually get older, we get them to put the things in the box. And as we go to bed at night, we check it's got everything they need. So they don't have to go wandering around looking for things. The next one is the whole notion of listening. It seems that there's an amount of words that they can comprehend, and then they can't. And I know as an English teacher that was very frustrating, giving out the task and knowing half the boys have already disconnected. So keep your requests short and often give a sign. David, grab your hat. Yeah, put your lunchbox, bag, point over there. Yep, it does help them. But as soon as you go through too many words, then you're going to go and repeat it again. So that's why nagging often isn't nagging. It's just you trying to get him the information. So I really recommend visual reminders on the fridge. So where are you up to? 1, 2, or 3? Yeah? Because sometimes you can say, wow, should we put a timer on and see how quick you get to number 3? But like I said, information overload is a real thing. The next one is, they can remember every dinosaur, but where are my socks? So what interests boys is the focus of their memory, whereas our girls can remember absolutely everything. So it's another really frustrating thing. So how come you can't remember that? Yeah, well, I don't. And it's important for us to be mindful of that. And there are obviously some of our boys who can remember things. Oh, that one did my head in. Help with organisation. Yeah, they're not as good as this in lots of ways, and that's before adolescence. So again, keep that in mind. How can I help him? Where do the shoes go? You know, like you could say every day of the week. Where do shoes go? Do you drop them outside the door, inside the door? Where do they go? You'd love it that they just popped it there. Some days they'll do it there and other days they won't, and you will get frustrated. Once again, it's a tendency and it can be frustrating. So I can either make it something I'm going to yell and shout about, or there are days I'm just going to do it and I'm going to remind him again. Remember, you left your shoes at the door today, but I've put them on the shelf. Try and remember. So gentle reminders work much more effectively. Another thing is, there's a whole lot of these, but connect first, as I said before. Check on your timing, because sometimes after school is not a good time to ask them to remember to put the towel up in the bathroom. The last one is show rather than tell. So if you've got a boy playing with his food at the dining table, you've explained it twice, and you say, and he hasn't really heard you, so you get his plate and put it next to you, and he'll go, what'd you do that for? And you're going to say, oh, so when you're ready to be able to eat your meal without playing with it, I'll give it back to you. So I'm going to show you rather than always just tell you. And remember your facial expression. Sometimes just screwing your face up and looking like no can actually stop a behavior rather than you always calling out and shouting. Sometimes just looking annoyed can sometimes do it. They're tuning into your voices, your facial expressions. Other things, they're very sensitive around favourites, so please don't throw out any t-shirt, any stick under the bed, anything like that, because sometimes they're really sensitive around keeping those things. I actually had one of my 23-year-old sons I was hanging his underpants out and the band came away from the bottom, and I told him it was time to throw it out, and he asked me to use my sewing machine to fix it because they were his favourite ones from high school. So remember, we're much more at cleaning out things that are just rubbish. Check with your son so you don't break his heart. The next one's temperature. A lot of our boys respond differently to temperature. So sometimes when he's going to school and it's -5 and he doesn't want a jumper, or just put the jumper in the bag and stop nagging. He will work it out. And the other one, we've actually worked out, boys do better in classrooms of 17 degrees and girls do better in classrooms of 22, and most classrooms are 22. Be good if we could meet it halfway. Just one mention around this. One of the things that can be really confusing for mums is, why is that such a big thing? That the penis, they either want to be touching it or playing it. It can actually be a regulating opportunity because it's very sensitive, and warm hands make him calm down. So have those conversations. It's his body in his bedroom is absolutely fine, possibly not anywhere else. And the second tip, no, it won't break with air guitar, because that worried me enormously. So remember, so often their behaviour is their language. And I think what we often think is that boys don't have the same emotions as girls, but they absolutely do. But our subtle conditioning means sometimes it's only the big emotions and anger and things that come out. And also that self-worth, if they keep seeing things that show they're not good enough, it will eat away at them. And that means can't finish that, can't jump there, other kids are being mean to me, whatever it might be. So remember, they do feel just differently. So I do suggest that pets are a great way to open up empathy for our little ones, helping them learn how to be gentle, you can build empathy pathways. I love a good guinea pig. And one of the things I often say is sometimes I want that guinea pig to die, because we want boys to know that when you lose something you are attached to, it hurts in your heart. It's not because you're weak, it's because you loved. All right, so there's lots of little messages about pets. I love that one. All right, so that's that other one. Often it comes out as anger, and so often stress comes out as outward behavior that looks like a boy chooses to be doing those things. Very quickly, this is that message again, that when a boy is flooded with cortisol, his environment doesn't feel safe, the people don't feel safe, he will be flooded with cortisol. And to move cortisol, his body needs to move. But sometimes there are things that we can do in the home that can lighten them up, and that's important to remember. If you have a boy that you probably said, I'm never going to buy them a gun, because I don't want that to be a big thing, and they make it out of toast or Lego. So we've got to remember there is an archetype in our boys about how do I kill baddies to save goodies. It's an archetype. So once again, the thing is, how do they do that in a way that doesn't frighten other children, that honours the archetype, but also recognises that the harm. So my challenge is, again, if they're doing a game like that that scares other children, we make sure they only play it in a certain area, and let our girls have capes. Let our girls go and do that too. But what we need to do is keep marinating boys in the stories of good warriors and good men, so that they have that in their mind. This is an example of good men in Australia. Trucks from Western Australia driving to the East Coast because of a drought. All those men gave up 10 days of their life to do what's the right thing. A good thing to keep in mind. I'm going to skip this because I'm going to run out of time very shortly. Remember, we've got roosters who are alphas, and these are quite challenging at times because they're strong and feisty and brave, and all of those things can be challenging in an environment. But what we actually want is we want our boys to develop some rooster but some lamb, so that they're assertive and they're strong to stand up for themselves, but they don't have to be a bully. So all of those things, we gradually build those in our kids. And that's the sort of thing a rooster would think is a great idea. And then after that, we've got our lambs. And remember, lambs are equally valid as boys, because they may take longer to grow into their competence in certain situations. You do not need to toughen up sensitive boys. Two of my sensitive boys are way braver in the surf than their brothers. So just again, they take a little longer to gain their own sense of independence and core strength. Please don't share anything, even a good news story, on a phone or online without your son's consent. They are very sensitive about their privacy. Check with them. The next one is when they muck up, because this is a big area that I find, because of their impulsivity, because they didn't think things through, that they do things like a little boy might throw a truck at a boy that called him a nasty name. So what we need to do is we need to just go through this again. They're not bad. They're not innately naughty. They just make poor choices because of the impulsivity of their brain wired a different way to girls. So we've got to stop hitting them, hurting them, and shaming them, because it creates a massive defensiveness later in life. It creates a scar. We need to teach them and guide them how to make better choices. So that little boy, once again, so this is what can happen when they've made a mistake. What we do is, so often this comes out. We go, oh no, roll our eyes. Our boys see that and it hurts. They know they've let you down again. Please don't freeze a boy out, Mum. I've had a 14-year-old boy who almost died by suicide because his mum froze him out. She didn't like his report card. And after 3 days, his friends fortunately got me to come and help because they knew something was wrong. And he told me, if my mum stopped loving me, I don't want to be here. Don't freeze boys out. Have the conversation and move on. And then there's more of them, because these have been around for a long time. Don't be stupid. Stop acting like a baby. These create enormous scars in all children. but I'm going to say, especially in our boys who give themselves self-worth. And then down the bottom, please don't say, I'm so disappointed in you. That creates a massive scar on our little boys. And they often create a lens that I am a disappointment for my mum. And everything they put through that means it's harder for them to feel good about themselves. So this is my code. So the first thing we have to do, that little boy that threw the truck because somebody called him an awful name, it was a spontaneous response, right? So first thing we need to let him, what was he trying to do? Right? I'm guaranteeing 99% of the time, no boy is trying to hurt another kid or another situation or break the wall. What he's done is a response to make it stop. So our job then is to explain why that's not okay. We don't hurt ourselves, we don't hurt others, and we don't hurt the world around us. So that's not okay. So that was exactly, we have to explain why that's not okay. And then what we have to do is how are you going to make it right? Right? Because when you're accountable for your mistakes, you grow to be a man who's accountable. So often we step in as parents, and that's great early on, but after 8, I want you to say to your son, so how are you going to make it right? Because we want him to be the one that works out how to make it right. That's how we raise awesome men. And that's the same thing, you support that journey. Now, what's next is if that happened again, your son is not terribly good at working out a better choice. So for the little boy who threw the truck, we say, okay, so what's next time if someone says something mean? How about we go, no, stop it, I don't like it. No, stop. And then what you do is you practice with him. You practice with him, you pretend you're the other boy, you pretend you're him, and every now and then we let that be. We have to practice it. We have to give them other choices because they're not as good at figuring that out. They get stuck in doing the same impulsive stuff unless we coach them. And then next, we hopefully forgive and forget. We can acknowledge the valuable learning, but my sons didn't appreciate that. So the other thing I want to say is immediately after something has happened, it's not the right time to talk to your son about it because they often have no idea what the heck just happened or what they did. So what we've actually worked out is that when something really big happens, the amygdala in girls fires up, and the next center immediately afterwards is the word center. For boys, the amygdala fires up and then the body fires up. And it takes a while to come into the word center, which is why sometimes taking them for a walk or whatever is a great idea, but it needs to possibly be, if it's not, bath time later or bedtime, maybe need to be the next day, because then he's had a chance to work through what happened and process it, because they need more time than us women. So when we say, what did you do that for? He can't answer you. And it's not him being deliberately disrespectful. All right, so I love that one. You can teach them how to write notes. Remember, remorse, he cannot feel genuine remorse until a lot later in life than we think we can. So telling them to say sorry when they don't mean it isn't always a good thing, but you modeling it, absolutely a good thing. All right, so why are our boys really struggling on other levels? The play. So what we actually know, and I just want to touch on Gail Gregory's work from back in the 1990s when I first discovered her work. She did research around boys who were perpetrators of mass shootings in schools. And there was a list of common things that came up. And one of them was an absence of play, and also an absent relationship with a father or a toxic relationship with a father. Sometimes there was some mental health issues with them, and infatuation with violence, particularly guns. So when you've got that little cluster early, notice attachment again, and notice play. Our little boys need to play lots in the real world, and what's happening today? They're not. They're playing online. So we've now got a generation of boys with less of a play code, which means they don't always read facial expressions, or they're just having it modeled to them online how to be violent. So it's and the safetyism, as again, in the US particularly, that safetyism is a concern. And it's something that, this is one of your playgrounds, which I visited last year, and I will show you Australian ones. So again, we've made that whole fear that our children will hurt themselves if we give them scary things. This is one of our playgrounds. And the monkey bars, so you took those away. Long monkey bars are incredibly important at building grit, resilience. They build the shoulder girdle, they build this grip, fine motor grip. So there's so much that goes on, but guess what? Kids fail over and over and over again before they can conquer the length of it. And that is something that used to be a part of childhood. Fortunately, in Australia, we've put them all back. Now, the other part to the natural consequence in play, what we now know is parents, really close by, watching all the time in case they hurt. We know kids take themselves to the edge of their own fear every time they play in environments that allow them to stretch. So if they can't stretch, they don't get braver. I would really like to see the wooden seesaw come back. I'm not sure what you call it in other parts of the world, because that was a fabulous piece of equipment for boys, because their mum might have told them, you've got to be careful because that can come up and hit you. Do you know what happens after the third time they get hit in the chin with that? They realise it's a piece of equipment they need to respect. So Ken, every now and then for boys, it's not the lecture of how to stay safe, it's their own experience. So ouchies, owies, bruises, cuts, they're all a part of natural growing up. This is another playground. This is what they do in some of our schools. They can climb up on these platforms. This is what we call loose parts play, where they build things together. And this one here is a spectacular one in Melbourne. So you can see in Australia, we embrace risk because it's a part of life. I also suggest boys get used to what fire is, a safe fire. This is a school that has a fire circle every week, because boys are fascinated by fire. So when they learn how to treat it properly, they're going to be safer right through life. So again, play helps our boys discharge the excess energy. The risk-taking and the free play helps to create bravery. And we need our boys to learn how to lose, because learning how to lose is a resilient skill. And we need all of these things, but you have to do it with real kids. So it's a pretty sad world we've lost those things, because if they can't learn about frustration tolerance through play, they're going to be frustrated, struggle with frustration their whole entire life. Okay, so the other part around fairly innate. I mean, I had my dad's sense of humour to keep me going. Laughter shifts the endorphins, that the cortisol, and lifts the positive endorphins. Boys and men tend to use laughter to do that. They help manage their stress. So one of the things we have to be, teasing and banter has always been a part of the boy-man world. However, we need to make sure our boys are not using it inappropriately that hurts others. So we've got to talk about inappropriate use of sexist, racist language, and also know that at times it can be frustrating to understand as a mother. So this is a little boy just checking, because he just wanted to check, he heard about it. Name the quadrilateral, don't you love it? Bob and Sam, so good. 5 words you can spell. That's pretty clever. So again, if you can lighten up around the home, you will help your boys with their stress, and also they feel closer to you. So I've got 2 podcasts I want to mention, which you can find out all this stuff wherever you get your podcast from. I've got several podcasts about boys, and this is the Good Enough Dad for Dads, so keep that in mind. Now, our boys are on this journey to manhood at some point, and our job, again, is how do we support them in a way, given that it's harder than ever to be a teen, there is more harm out there, there is more danger, not only in the digital world, in the physical world. So we really have to work out, how do I support my boy on that bridge to adulthood? How do I support them as a mother? And in the survey I did for men, from boys to men, over 60% said the most important person in that journey to adulthood was their mum. Yes, of course they need good men, but when they muck up, where they land, where's the safe base? Who's going to come get them? So keep that in mind, but you do have to step back and step back. And it isn't easy. Just a few of the things in case you're not aware of the boy journey. When that surges of extra testosterone happened, it means there's bigger feelings and the body might need a lot more energy. So if they're just gaming online and not moving their physical body, that can also end up being a difficult space. There's no GABA. So in this window where they're wired, girls and boys are wired to take more risks because they're stretching themselves into adulthood. GABA is an impulse inhibiting neurochemical. It's turned off. So they'll make even more poor choices. And you will get so frustrated with that. They can misinterpret social situations and emotions because they've got an immature brain. And the brain actually does some pruning. So their memory will get worse. Their organisation skills can get worse. And I really want you to prepare your boys for this. So go and read something, and there's lots of free blogs on my website. Prepare him for the changes that are coming so that when it happens, he doesn't feel like he's the only one who seems to have got dumber, the only one who's got grumpy, the only one who's really stressed, because it's really important for them to know. So remember, they're looking at novelty, but they don't look at risk. So again, it is a bumpy journey. They often feel terribly misunderstood, and they just feel, I don't matter. It's a really important window. Again, this is where that early attachment and safe base is. If that, keep building that. And I'm going to say that two of the things that worked best in my world was making sure I was always able to be kind, and I was always able to lighten up when I needed to, because sometimes that's what saved difficult moments. So there's that book for you. All right, so what else do they need in this journey? They need significant adult allies that aren't mum and dad. Yes, we've always needed them, and it's great if your son has some great male figures. It can be a male teacher, uncle, grandparent. It can be someone in a club. They actually need someone who makes them feel they matter, that isn't mum or dad. And you step up and be one as well, because sometimes just one conversation can change a boy's life. Now, one of the other things, it's this bit about letting them go, and of course I'm dropping another quote in from Michael Gurian. It is really important that he has to leave the parental thing, but particularly because mums are going to be worrying about a million things that they're going to do wrong. And at some point, we've got to let him go to make those mistakes and learn from them. One of my challenges in my latest book, Help Me Help My Teen, is when our teens muck up, we don't fix it or rescue them. We come alongside them and help them work out how they are going to navigate that with the best possible information, because this is how they build skills and how they develop resilience and how they develop a capacity to be able to know what to do without leaning on their parents. So once again, it's really important for them. And most of mine headed off, and two of them headed overseas. One of them did 6 months in Whistler in Canada. Was very worried when he had to have his appendix removed, an emergency operation. So it's the stretching and letting them go. That means we stop texting, we stop sending a million messages on whatever. Create space, just keep reminding them there's nothing you can do that will stop me loving you, no matter what. That's what they need to hear often. And sometimes write it in a note. Write it so they have it, because they can forget the spoken word, but they will not forget the written word. Write them notes, send them cards. So letting go is difficult. It is the greatest act of love we can give our boys. And when we let them go on a unique life journey, at some point we meet them again as grown men. And it's a really important thing for you to know. That is an amazing, you don't lose your sons. If you have that connection, you never lose your sons. That old myth that they used to say isn't technically correct. So once again, that's the Mothering Our Boys book available. That's the last of the parenting books that I'm doing. And I love this because this is kind of capturing the quirkiness of young boys. Dear mum, thank you so much for being my mum. If I had a different mum, I'd punch her in the face and go and find you. So my message to you all is that when mothers come to understand that our boys see the world differently, but we can embrace that and we can let them be loved even when they muck up, they will grow to be that man that we hope to meet one day, who has not only backbone, he has heart, and he has a good mind, and he's become a good human. We play an enormous role, and I thank you for all those moments that you are going to put some more light and love into your son's life. So I hope that's helpful. So all my best wishes from Australia to all of you.